Hello, everyone. Our speaker today is Jen Wilsey, a senior associate at the Interaction Institute for Social Change, whose website describes itself as working with organizations, communities, networks, and others to build their capacity for more effective, equitable, and inclusive social change. We also offer workshops that provide participants with the opportunity to learn and practice the skills and tools of collaboration for social change. Ms. Wilsey gave this talk at the University of Georgia College of Education this past September to students and faculty. So, in effect, she is advising teachers and future teachers on how to teach for social change. I am only going to cover her opening gambit in this talk, both for the sake of time and for my personal mental health. A link to the full presentation is in the description if you're curious to hear more. All of that being said, let's take a look.
Thank you. This is my first time at the University of Georgia, so it's really good to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing a lot from you all and hoping that this can be a conversation. So before I even get started, I want to give you 2 minutes to turn to someone near you and name what is one thing you're bringing into this room, a curiosity about whiteness?
A curiosity about whiteness? I don't know. I guess I am curious as to what our speaker would call someone who focuses and dwells on a particular race as being inherently flawed, or a race that is just inherently detrimental to others.
So, I'm Jen.
Hi, Jen. I'm Scribe.
And really honored to be with you today. I'm going to share a short talk with you and then hope we can get into more of a conversation as we go. And the reason I want to start with trees, this is a photo I took in Tallahassee, actually in my park that's behind my in-laws' house, is because when we talk about whiteness, we need to get perspective. And there's nothing like trees that are hundreds of years old on this continent and in the South, right?
Right.
We're in the South here today. They've seen it all, right?
Right.
Trees, huh? Okay, let me try and guess what the analogy is going to be. A very old tree, especially in the South, is like whiteness because whiteness has very deep roots and has been part of the landscape for so long that people just don't notice it anymore. Am I getting warm?
They've seen it all. They've seen everything from indigenous genocide to lynchings to Jim Crow to the current white supremacists, who are marching in Charlottesville and other places around the country. They've seen it all.
And unlike the events of the distant past, what has been the overall reaction by the public and the media towards the sentiments and ideologies of white supremacists, as with Charlottesville? Oh, that's right. Resoundly rejected and vilified. Are you going to tell us that this isn't the case? Because I have a feeling...
And so I'm inspired by trees like this to take a step back and say, okay, wait a minute, we need to look at hundreds of years here. When we're talking about whiteness. There's a lot happening right now, and also we have a long view behind us that we need to keep in mind.
Yes, we need to dwell on the actions of the distant past to hold to account those in the present, because of the color of their skin. Got it.
And you've all mentioned this already, but what does racism in 2017 look like?
In 2017? Well, truth be told, I think I may be watching it right now.
It looks like dominant narratives. You were talking about Muslims after 9/11. Right now, the dominant narratives of our time are black equals criminal, Muslim equals terrorist, Latino equals illegal alien. But what's the dominant narrative about white people?
Privileged, racist, white supremacist, or the unwitting beneficiaries of white supremacy, which needs to be held against white people as an inherent sin. And yeah, I think those are the big ones.
I would venture to say there is not one, because it functions as an invisible foundation beneath everything else in our dominant narratives about race and racism in this country.
There isn't one. And so your mission in this lecture is to what? Argue for a negative racial stereotype to be commonly applied to white people? If that is your goal, what kind of person do you think that makes you?
So we know that in 2017, we're looking at a growing wealth gap between whites and people of color.
Do people of color include Asians? What's the wealth gap between Asians and whites? And in whose favor is that gap?
Gap is huge. We're actually right now at a time where we're looking at, in the year 2020, the median white household will own 86 times more wealth than its black counterpart, and 68 times more than its Latino counterpart.
Okay, because I'm lazy, I will stipulate to your figures for the sake of argument. Whites do and will possess more wealth on average than other racial demographics. And the conclusion you draw from this is what? That all white people are inherently wealthy?
In 2020, the median white household will own 86 times more wealth than its black counterpart and 68 times more than its Latino counterpart.
So whites are wealthier than Hispanics, and Hispanics are wealthier than blacks. So, do Hispanics then have to apologize to black people due to their brownness?
This is the result, again, of hundreds of years of policies and practices and legal proceedings that have created this arrangement.
Really? Then why aren't all the white people rich? Why aren't all the black people poor? If the median numbers you cite are the arrangement, then why am I still working a full-time job?
It's not because of the inferiority of black or Latino people, right?
Right.
It's because of a set of policies and practices that have made it so.
Yes, black and Latino people are all inherent victims of a system crafted specifically to undercut their abilities and potential. No matter what they try to do, they will always be obstructed from succeeding due to their race. The quality of their life isn't their fault or their responsibility. They're just being inherently oppressed. To look at a black or brown person is to see someone who is inherently a victim. Got it.
We also know that black people are 2.8 and 1.7 times more likely to die during encounters with police than white people.
Well, which is it? 2.8 or 1.7? And what is your implication here? That in every instance the shooting was unjustified? That it was always a white police officer behind the trigger? I think of speeches like these as ideological inkblot tests. A statistic is offered into the ether, and it is left to the listener to conjure forth the correct cause for those facts. In religion, it is often, this is how things are, we don't have an explanation for how they are, therefore it is God's doing. That is called the God of the Gaps theory, filling in the absence of understanding with the lazy handwave of it is God. Our speaker here is practicing the whiteness of the gaps theory. This is how things are, therefore whiteness. It is just as lazy and just as incurious a notion as religion.
So we're at a time when we've had our first black president, right?
Right.
We have a growing Black Lives Matter movement that's strong and powerful and actually putting forward the first platform for black liberation and freedom than we've seen in this country in decades.
and promoting the genetic inferiority of white people, and calling for the killing of police, and whose supporters have killed police. Oh, but let's not mention those things. I mean, we wouldn't want to sully the image of a racially supremacist movement now, would we?
And then we have our current president, right?
Right.
Who actually campaigned and won on the most explicit, more explicit white supremacist platform than we've seen in decades in our country.
Good Christ, why do I always end up in a position where I am having to defend Donald Trump? Why do you make me do this? But okay, please quote for me, and I mean quote for me, when Donald Trump promoted white supremacy on the campaign trail. When?
So this is the time that we're in. I think people are no longer saying we're in post-racial America, right?
Right.
And you are smiling as you say that. Why?
Racism is alive and well in 2017. I think this is something that people of color a lot of times knew and were not surprised by, but we're seeing a lot of white people who are, after Donald Trump was elected, like, whoa, what is going on in this country? I thought we'd made so much more progress. So we're at a time, I think, where there's a big wake-up going on around whiteness and white supremacy and how that's playing out in our country.
By the way, why are you speaking? Why do you feel as though you're in a position to talk about these issues? I mean, you're white. You didn't come to your position in life through hard work or effort. It was obviously just handed to you. So, you don't know hardship. You're wealthier than most everyone else by dint of your skin color. You're not being shot by police. What makes you think you have the right to stand there and lecture to the very people you are oppressing with your own presumption of superior knowledge? Huh? Huh? Can you not understand the trap you are building for yourself and for anyone else who happens to have a skin color similar to your own?
So I think what never gets stated explicitly, so often we're looking at these data points like I just named about how people of color are doing worse than white people, but we don't look at whiteness and white people and why is it that white people are doing better in these statistics.
Oh, you're going to ask why now? All right, I am ready to be educated. What is it about white people that makes them inherently superior to other racial demographics?
And so what I want to talk about is the narrative that never gets stated explicitly, which is that white is best, white is superior, white is normal.
That never gets stated explicitly. Well, actually, I hear that all the time. And you know from who? Social justice advocates and progressive outlets. They are working really, really hard to convince me of those things so they can then call it a social crime that I am thus complicit in. And why would that be? Because of my race.
And that's why we're here today, to kind of peel that back and say too often we don't look at whiteness, we don't examine it. And so that's what this conversation is about today.
Oh, this is a conversation? I thought it was a lecture. Or perhaps a sermon? Which would be especially appropriate since our speaker got her master's degree in theology, which is, of course, another method of using myth and misunderstanding to dictate to people how they should think and how they should behave.
3 points I want to bring to you during this talk. One is that whiteness is a made-up idea. So we're going to look at a little bit of the history of how did whiteness come to be and where did this idea come from.
Whiteness is a fiction. Well, I completely agree.
White supremacy is bad for all of us, including white people, is another point that I want to make, and I'm going to tell a couple of stories to illustrate why I think that.
White supremacy is bad. Well, I completely agree.
And then finally, white people have a really important role to play in racial justice. So I also want us to spend some time on looking at what that looks like.
Racial justice. Say it with me. Racial justice. Justice predicated on skin color. Got it.
So the first thing we want to explore is, what is whiteness? Too often we're focusing on the plight of people of color, but not on white people. And this talk is not about white supremacists. What I want to focus on today is white supremacy, which is both the belief that whites are superior, which is a belief that you can't not internalize in this society, but also the system that has set up white people in a position of privilege across our country. So we're going to be talking about white supremacy as a system rather than white supremacists as people as we go forward.
White supremacy as a system. Well, it's a pretty failed system if it helped to elect a black president twice. It's a pretty failed system when black football players make more than white police officers. It's a pretty failed system when 17 million white people live below the poverty line in this country.
To keep whiteness invisible is dangerous.
But whiteness is made up. It doesn't exist. You said so yourself. How can it be dangerous to keep something invisible that isn't even a something to begin with? So, the safe thing to do is to manifest whiteness? Golly, this is all very, very confusing and contradictory. I am so glad that greater minds than my own are absorbing this wisdom in order to impart it onto younger, more agile minds who can better accept it without question or curiosity. That is a future that I just cannot wait to whiteness. I mean, witness. As always, thank you for watching.